Well, my research is about participation and social change, and my research history has been in Latin America. And the questions I ask really come out of, well, it's well over 3 decades now, of working in different countries in Latin America, mostly with social movements, social activists, people trying to bring about change from below in really complex environments, environments of complex violences, of poverty, of authoritarian governments and dictatorships, and looking at the process by which Latin Americans have managed to bring about some level of formal democracy in the region, but where we have huge deficits around the nature of that democracy. Yes, on the basis of that work in Latin America, where I suppose I've been very influenced by popular education ideas, ideas of what Paulo Freire calls conscientization, how people become subjects of their own history, that led me to set up the Centre for Participation Studies in the Department of Peace Studies. And Participation Centre works in Latin America and other parts of the world, but in our locality of Bradford as well. And we've been trying to develop research methodologies which enable us to learn from those Latin American processes and not to transfer them in an arbitrary way to a totally distinct context, i.e. Bradford or the north of England, but try and see what we can learn by contrasting the Latin American forms of participation and the way in which in England people have begun to participate. And so we have recently completed a research project which has looked at non-governmental public participation, that is participation that is not done by governments but done outside the state, looking at those non-governmental actors and how they've used new spaces of participation that have opened up from above. And our methodology has been to track with those participants how they use the spaces and to try and develop a methodology which is not extractive of information but is interactive. In other words, a lot of people, particularly when you work on regions that are far away, you interview people, you work with people, you take data and you publish it in journals which are only read then outside the context of the people you're working with. We've tried to find a way in which the research we do feeds back continuously to the people who are the actors in the spaces that we've been tracking. And so this particular project, we took 6 cities, 3 in Latin America, Caracas, Medellin and Porto Alegre, and we took 3 in the UK. We took Manchester, Salford and Bradford. And we built up relationships with the people that were trying to make change by using these participation spaces. And all the way we recognised that this knowledge was being co-produced. In other words, there is an academic form of knowledge, but there is also knowledge that comes from the experience of the people with whom we were working. And so that tries to create a more egalitarian approach to the research process. And we then ensure that all the sort of research information that comes out is fed back to those people. And that's been one of our methodologies that we've been developing. I should briefly say that we have tried to experiment with other kinds of participatory methodologies in other research we've done. One particular project we've been involved in the last 2 years has been on the White Estates of Bradford, looking at different forms of participation on those estates. And in that project we've been working with community researchers. So the idea was that if we work with people who live on the estates themselves, not only do we get to understand better the situation and condition in which people live, we also get greater ownership of the research. So the research can then have an impact on people's thinking on those estates about how they could make change. And in that particular research we used participatory video and photographs and a range of what we call social mapping, a range of different methodologies to enable that research to, as I said before, be more interactive and less extractive. Right, well I think it's incredibly important if I take the White Estates work we've been doing, in that often policymakers assume they know what is right for the people who are living in some of the most impoverished and difficult environments. And one of our aims was to get the residents on the estates to themselves construct their analysis of their lived environment and to bring the policymakers to them to hear what they have to say. So in a way, it's a reversing the power relationships that exists, and understanding that knowledge is a form of power, but often some forms of knowledge are given greater value than others. So one of our aims in our research is to enable people who don't normally get heard, don't normally even have a voice, to self-analyse their situation, to encourage them to support that, and to enable them then to speak to the more powerful. And in academic terms, we try to create through that a field of systematic study of what kind of methodologies can generate what kind of change. So that participation for us is a very complex term. We don't assume participation is always inevitably a good thing. Sometimes some people would think of fascism as participation. We're trying to look at what qualifies participation, what makes it a component of progressive social change. And we feel in order to do that, we have to very much work with the participants in our research processes rather than treat them as objects of our research.